Hello everyone, welcome to this Delta Hub webinar. Delta is about developing teaching and learning in Africa for change. In today's video, we're going to show you the first half of a webinar we conducted on SEN and additional needs. This webinar also had a Q&A section at the end. If you'd like to find out more about how you can access our Q&A sessions or access our other training and our resources that we have, then please stick to the end of this video where we will explain the membership, what's coming up, and what you can get from Delta Hub. We hope you enjoy this video.
I'd like to say welcome to everyone here. And thank you so much to everyone for muting your mics. It's really important to eliminate all the background noise so that we can really focus on what it is that we're going to be looking at today. So the outcomes for today, the three main outcomes today, which will be to explore an overview of special needs in two countries. So we're looking basically at the UK and Nigeria. And of course, for the UK, it's actually England and Wales we'll be looking at because the Scottish have got a separate system. So sorry to talk too much about the UK. I know most of the people here who are on this webinar are based in Nigeria. There are maybe a few who are based in the UK, but most people are in Nigeria. But I hope that people benefit from the overview looking at the two countries. Also, we're going to look at identifying two perspectives and policies. So the Nigerian perspective and the British perspective and policies on special needs. Again, it's just an overview. And then I would like to present to you an argument on a difference between special needs and additional needs, or special educational needs and additional educational needs. So the UK perspective, which I'm going to move on to without much ado, looks at the individual, and it's about the special educational needs of individuals. The UK approach, I mean, as we know, all societies have their ways of seeing things and understanding things based on their own history and their own experience. And so there isn't an expectation here that one society has to be like the other, or that one society is better than the other. Certainly not. It is just for us to look at the two different perspectives, and for hopefully that will guide the questions. I have a very short time to talk, so I hope you don't find what I'm saying too rushed, because the organizers, Mrs. Lanio and Mrs. Bahani, have given quite a big amount of time to question and answers so that people can ask questions. So what I'm hoping to do with this initial bit is to give some kind of background against which you can look at the ideas that you have and ask your questions. So the UK perspective that we're looking at today, as I said earlier on, is focusing the UK perspective focuses on the needs of individuals. In the UK, we see individuals who may now have a certain kind of need. So if we work on the understanding that every human being, each and every one of us are individuals, and we're all different from each other. So even if you're what's the word now? Even if you are identical twins, there will still be one tiny 0.0% of you that is not the same. So each person is an individual, and each person is different. And so when we're looking at special educational needs, we're recognizing that just like everyone has their own differences, people with special educational needs are people who have differences, and their differences, those differences are now categorized in these four areas. You might notice when Mrs. Lanyon was telling us about the upcoming sessions, those upcoming sessions have been tailored to the four UK special educational needs code categories. And those are, as you can see on the screen, cognition and learning needs, communication, interaction, social, emotional, mental health, sensory and physical needs. Please do check your mics to be sure that they are all muted, please. Thank you. Now, you probably might also know, for the few of you who might know anything about me, I'm a university lecturer. I lecture in one of the, I even lecture in one of the UK universities in southeast England. And one of the arguments that I tend to have with my students is about understanding special educational needs as something that's permanent. So if we look at the needs that come under these 4 areas, and we'll go into much detail about that within the upcoming sessions, these needs don't go away, they don't change. But basically what happens is learners develop strategies and they use augmentative aids to adjust, if you like, to be able to engage with the curriculum and to get on with their day-to-day living. So the whole point is to function autonomously, to become more and more independent in what you do. And so that's how that works. So if we take a little bit on the historical perspective, so historically in the UK, now there's a lot of history before 1944. And of course, we don't have time to go into lots of history, but there were 11 categories of special educational needs. And there, as you can see on the screen there, blind, delicate, etc., physically handicapped, and even uneducable. I mean, nowadays, some of us will hear that word uneducable and think, wow, that's really harsh, to look at a person and say you're uneducable or maladjusted. The language is quite heavy, and it's quite, well, I don't want to use the word judgmental because that's not maybe what they were, because as at that time, this was to help children with special educational needs. It wasn't about pointing a finger at them or putting people down. It was about recognizing those differences. But the language, educationally subnormal, is quite heavy. And of course, nowadays we see things differently. And if we take a look at legislation around that time as well, so after 1944, from a legislative point of view, there was the Education Act, which identified the 11 categories on the previous slide. And then there was the 1947 Act, which established special schools to teach children with severe learning difficulties. Now, the severe learning difficulties, if you like, were those that was on the previous slide were uneducable or educationally subnormal. And then most other children with special needs were to have special classes in normal schools, or what we call mainstream schools, and such like. So that was 1974. Now, coming up to 1970, there was a better understanding of children with special educational needs, and no child was considered to be uneducable. So there was that recognition in the 70s of changing the language, because of course language carries, it carries our assumptions, doesn't it? The assumptions we make about things, the stereotypes we have about things, that's what language does. And so by the time it got to 1978, the Warnock report came out. That was a committee set up by the government to look at the education of handicapped children and young people. And the language was one of the things that the Warnock committee addressed, among other things. So words like handicapped, educationally subnormal, Mongol, and so on, they were removed and replaced with the term special educational need, in the recognition that these are individuals, these are people just like anybody else, but they are people who have differences just like anybody else. But this is what their differences are. And their differences could constitute a barrier to them engaging with the school curriculum, and thus schools have to now do something to address those barriers. So that's really very much what the report was about. I think, well, in my humble opinion, it was more about getting more respect and more understanding for people who had special educational needs. And so the Warnock report advocated that as many children as possible should be educated in mainstream schools, although as the years went by, it was realized that that wasn't really, what's the word now? It wasn't really a practical or necessarily a beneficial approach for all special needs. So certain special needs definitely, but not all. So the whole idea about inclusion, you may have come across the term inclusion, or it might be something you want to write down for your questions later. But the whole point about Warnock was to include children and young people with special educational needs in mainstream schools. And so on the basis of the Warnock report, the first Special Educational Needs Code of Practice came out in 1994. And what the Code of Practice does, as any Code of Practice should do, is to give guidelines to schools and educational organizations and any organization that is dealing with children, to give guidance on recognizing, first of all, what the categories of special educational needs are and what each of those categories entail, and then the kind of support and the kind of strategies that should be put in place, and also how to review those needs, how to make sure that every child's special educational needs were met. And so that's essentially what the Code of Practice is about. And that Code of Practice has been reviewed twice since then, 2002, and our current Special Educational Needs Code now includes disabilities. So the first two codes did not include disabilities, it was just special educational needs. But the 2015 version, which is the most recent version, includes disabilities. So it's called the SEND code rather than the SEN code that we had before. So 2015 also is the point at which the most recent Nigerian policy comes into play. I tried to do a bit of research. It might be that my access to information was limited, and there might be people here who have more information on our Nigerian perspective on special needs. So the Nigerian policy on special needs it says special needs education rather than special educational needs. And I found that really intriguing. So you might recollect that I mentioned earlier on that the UK approach says special educational needs. And what it does, the assumption behind that is you're looking at an individual who happens to have certain needs. But when we look at the Nigerian perspective, it says special needs education. And the assumption for me is that the needs are not separate from the individual. So if a person has got special needs, the individual is seen in relation to those needs. This is not a right or wrong or a good or bad, it's just a perspective. And so the assumption is that the needs are not separate from the individual. And so what the policy aims at doing is it recognizes that these people have got special needs, and they're defined by those special needs. And the policy looks to providing an education for the people. And the Nigerian policy, the national policy on special needs education, has three categories. So it's got persons with disabilities, it's got at-risk children or youth, and it's got gifted and talented children and young people. So, and what the policy does is it explains the purpose. So the purpose of the Nigerian special needs education policy is to take care of the total service delivery. So having recognized that special needs, individuals who have special needs require an education, the focus for the Nigerian policy is to take care of the total service delivery, the physical, the mental, the emotional, wherever that person is. One thing that I found very interesting in that policy was that it recognized that there'd been hitherto, that is before 2015, whatever little there was in terms of attention to special educational needs, it focused very much on the school. And so what that policy does is to extend that to the home and to hospital settings. And another one of its purposes is to provide adequate qualitative education for all persons with special needs in whatever area that they need that, and also to enable them to develop at a pace commensurate with their abilities. And again, that was another point of thinking for me. Because you sort of think, okay, so if a person has got special needs and they've got certain abilities, the policy is to enable them to develop at a pace that their abilities allow them to develop as. And there are lots of questions, there could be lots of questions and debate around that. There could be, yes, this is really good because it doesn't it doesn't burden them. You know, as Nigerians, I know that we are very much achievement focused, and we like the high grades. We celebrate people who do really well, and that's our society, that's our culture, which I think is great. But the good thing about this policy is I think it's getting people to recognize that people with special needs might not have that same level of ability to attain high things, or if they can, it won't be at the same pace. And so it's to enable them to develop at their own pace so that they too can contribute to the nation's socioeconomic and technological development. So if we take a look at a quick timeline for the Nigerian policy on special educational needs, 1977. Now, I remember I was in secondary school in Nigeria in 1977. If I remember correctly, I was in Form 3. It was called Forms in those days, which is probably JS3 now. And I remember, I must be honest with you, I thought to myself, I certainly do not remember anybody in my class having special educational needs, or if they had, they certainly weren't, you know, there was no, there weren't, it wasn't recognized. Let's put it this way. I did notice that there were quite a few people in my class who constantly failed their exams and failed their tests and had, you know, and of course the society then wasn't what's the word? The society wasn't empathetic towards them, nor did it recognize anything as a special need. I remember 1977 very clearly. So it's also interesting to see, if you look at a simple Google search will get you the Nigerian National Policy on Special Needs Education. It took me 2 seconds on a Google search to find it. And it's interesting that this is the 2015 policy that says special needs were noted in a section. So there was a national policy on education, and there was a section there on special needs. That doesn't really look like a lot to me, but maybe at the time it probably was a lot. And then in between 1978 and 1979, there was a blueprint in the education policy that stated that there will be a joint national committee on special needs education. As of 2015, the committee hadn't been implemented. So again, maybe since then it has been, but this is the most up-to-date information I could find. So basically in between 1978 and 2013, there have been various policy interventions which required review as of 2015, and 2015 has the national policy. In 2015, there was actually a separate national policy on special needs education, which in my view is definitely an improvement on just a section in an overall education policy. The 2015 national policy on special educational needs has got a number of different areas, as you can see here. Now, one thing you might note, a few slides earlier on, I spoke about the three main categories on the Nigerian policy on special needs education, and the three main categories were people with disabilities, children and young people who are at risk, and the gifted and talented. And if you look at this slide here, this is an extract from the policy. You would see that they've all sort of been put together, and they're seen as exceptionality, something that makes people exceptional. And I think exceptional, I read the word exceptional here as what makes them different from the norm, you know, an exception to the norm, if you like. And that again can be debated, you know, over and over again. One thing I do note here is that if we identify at-risk children, which is in the second column, the right-hand column, and further down that right-hand column, you would see the gifted and talented. If we take those two out, all the others come under physical disabilities. And another thing that we probably could note is that, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, but the UK approach is a different approach, and what the UK approach does is, being at risk or being gifted and talented doesn't come under special educational needs. Those are separate policies, and special educational needs, the Special Educational Needs Code deals with everything that are categorized as persons with disabilities in the Nigerian Special Needs Codes. So in effect, what I'm saying is the difference between the two is that. Now, models. I thought it was important to put something in here about models, because I've spoken about two different perspectives, and I know that I hope people are noting their questions to ask me later on. But there are two models here, a medical model and a social model. So the medical model has a perspective that sees a person with a special needs or a person with disabilities, if you want to use the Nigerian description, the fault is within the person. And the way you deal with that fault is by diagnosis. You find a label for it, visual impairment, for example, and that impairment becomes the focus of attention. So when you see a visually impaired person, you don't see an individual, you see an individual with an impairment. And which is, if you notice, there are two different ways of seeing a person. And the way in which you follow through on a medical model is you assess and you monitor, and usually segregation. So, excuse me, please. You might note that, for example, there are schools for the blind or schools for the deaf, and so on, so that they're separated so that their needs can be supported and met, and a number of services put in place to help. And usually, when with the medical model, because the impairment becomes the focus of attention, what a person could ordinarily do is put on hold, because the impairment is what's in view. You know, recently, well, people might not know, but recently there was a quadriplegic. Sorry, I can't get the words out today. Quadriplegic, a person who has the 4 limbs amputated, who was able, with the support of others, to go on a mountain climbing expedition and got to the top. Now, I don't think it was Everest, but it was definitely a mountain close to Everest. I wish I had that information to hand, but I don't. Now, of course, there were other people there with him supporting him, but he did what he could do, and he had the support. Now, I've got 4 limbs, and I haven't climbed a hill, let alone a mountain. And so it's interesting to see, what are the ordinary needs? Are the ordinary needs of a person who has a special educational need or a disability, is there something about them that is different from that disability that could be nurtured and supported? That's really where the question is here. And so where the person, with the medical model, where the person becomes a bit more aligned with the so-called normal, if you like, or then they're able to re-enter into society, or they're able to engage and be a bit more independent in society. And if not, they remain segregated. And society itself remains unchanged. Society doesn't do anything about this. But if we look at the social model, for example, and you can see the time periods here. So the medical model in the Western world was in between 1870 and 1970. The social model started in 1970 up to 2010. There's another model called the affirmative model, which I'm not going to talk about today. But when I talk about this with my university students, you know, there are arguments for both, and some say, well, in my place of work, because my students work, in my place of work, we have both the medical and the social model and so on. But if we look at the social model, in contrast to the medical model, the child is valued rather than seen as a person who's faulty. The strengths and needs of that individual is defined by themselves and others. So if a person has got visual impairment and says that they want to go to an art gallery, you know, no one says to them, well, you can't see, what are you going to do in an art gallery? No, you go to the art gallery, and what the art gallery does is present its art in a way that a person who is visually impaired can also enjoy. And I'm sure you have a few questions as how is that possible? And I'm very happy to answer those later. And the social model identifies the barriers. So for the social model, the barrier isn't the need. So, and I'll stick with my example of a visual impairment. So people who look at special needs through a social model do not see the visual impairment, the partial impairment, or the complete lack of vision as the issue. What they see is the environment not being able to cope with that. That's where the barrier is. So the barrier within the social model is within the environment. And what they do is look at outcome-based programs. So you design programs with outcomes that enable that person to engage. Resources are made available, training is made available, relationships are nurtured, diversity is welcome, as I mentioned earlier on, an individual with differences, rather than an individual who has needs. And society evolves. Society evolves because it learns to adapt and change itself to allow a person with the special needs to be the same as a person who doesn't have special needs. In other words, everyone is an individual with differences. So that's about the two models. Now, the third outcome, you might, for those of you who were here when we started off, was to look at an argument, and I thought I'll throw out this argument to you. So again, when I talk to my uni students, this is something that I have put together. Well, these categories are what I've put together. You will not find these categories in the UK Code of Practice. But what this does is talk about additional educational needs. And these are argued as developmental needs, social-cultural needs, and social-economic needs. You might remember that with the Nigerian policy, it had at-risk children and it had gifted and talented, all under special educational needs, which is fine, that's an approach. In the UK, those areas are not, excuse me please, under special educational needs, they're separate. And as I've already mentioned. And so what I sat down and did was look over my 35 short years of teaching and learning and look at the different students that I've come across either at secondary school level or at university level, or in various positions, the different types of needs. And of course, what you read in textbooks, what you read in articles, educational articles. And we were I was able to list 18 different types. Well, 2018, I'll go with the 18 different types of additional educational needs. And the focus, so if I look at developmental needs, for example, in the first instance, so there are children, for example, who are learning English as an additional language. And one thing I must say before I go into depth about this is where special educational needs are, and I'm using the UK description now, perspective now, are permanent. They don't change, as I mentioned when I was on that slide. Additional educational needs can change. They're not permanent, they're actually temporary. That's part of what the argument is. And so students who are learning English as an additional language, now, I remember when I was teaching in Nigeria, most children could speak English. I mean, I know that was a long time ago. So the last time I taught in Nigeria would be, oh, goodness me, 1988 or thereabouts. I was teaching English in a school in Lagos, and all the children there could speak English. But I don't know what's happened over the years. It might be now that you have children who are coming into the country who don't speak English. Definitely children, there are many, most Western nations have children coming in from other parts of the world who do not speak English as a first language, but they speak it as an additional language. They might speak 3 or 4 other languages. And so for that period of time, there's a barrier to the curriculum for them. But it's a temporary state of affairs. So having that support to get them to be able to learn enough English in order to engage with the curriculum independently means that during that period of time, they have an additional educational need. But it's not a special need because it's not permanent. Gifted and talented learners, many of us are familiar as teachers with who the gifted and talented are. They're quite exceptional. They're outstanding in things. They find normal lessons very difficult to follow because the pace is too slow for them. They need a quicker pace, they need more challenging ways of learning. And as I mentioned earlier on, the Nigerian national policy identifies gifted and talented as a third strand of special educational needs. Gifted and talented are not considered SEN in Nigeria, in the UK. It's a separate policy, but my argument is that it's an additional educational needs. In other words, as tutors, we need to do something additional to the curriculum in order to engage with that. And well, I hope people's gifts and talents are not temporary, but it's because it's not a negative. It's not something that takes away from them. And then a third developmental need is summer born children who are born where the school year, who are at the cutoff point of the school year. So if we look at, and I'm pretty sure in Nigeria it's the same, the school year starts in September. So children who are born in August, are the youngest, and people who are born in September are the oldest. However, I know that it might be different. So that's in the UK also is September to August. However, in Nigeria, I know that children progress according to exams and children repeat academic years. By and large in the UK, children we don't have annual exams. And even if you do, they don't stop you from moving to the next year. You just move anyway. And I think it's quite similar in many European countries. There's a Reinevelt and some of his colleagues did a study and identified grade age groups and year groups. And they looked at grade age groups that start on the 1st of September and end on the 31st of August. And then they looked at year groups, and year groups run from January to December. So all countries that run from January to December, according to Reinevelt, are year groups. And so children who are at that cutoff point, so if you're looking at a year group, the children who are born, so if you're looking at January, the eldest are in January and the youngest will be in December. So those December children, for example, for the year groups, tended not to engage as well with the curriculum as those who were born in January, because of course those who were born in January are 12 months older. And of course, earlier on, when you're 4 or 5, 12 months is a big difference. You know, when you turn 60, 12 months is nothing. But when you're that age, 12 months is a big difference. And in the same way, if we look at the September and August connection as well, children who are born in August are much younger. And so the older learners were found out to perform better than the younger learners. And another link that was found in terms of the season of birth and attainment, David et al., David and his colleagues, found that attainments in maths, reading, and spelling, they found differences. And the ones who were born, the ones who were younger didn't do as well as the ones who were older, despite the fact that everybody was in the same year. And so when you look at the higher streams, and that is when you stream children, as in you put the clever ones in one group and the middle ones in another group, and then the weaker ones in a lower group, that's called streaming. Even though they're all in the same academic year, they're different streams. They found that most of the autumn-born children born in between September and December, tended to be in the higher streams, and the children who were born around about July and August tended to be in the lower streams. Of course, there are outliers. You know, if you do your normal bell curve on that, you will have those who don't follow the trend. But in terms of the norm, that tended to be the situation. And when you looked at the SEND referrals, particularly to do with behavior, for example, most of them tend to be summer-born children who are born in between July and August. Pupil referral units are units where children are sent when they're finding it difficult to engage in mainstream schools. Now, it could be that they were incorrectly identified as having special educational needs because they were probably not keeping up, they're not progressing as well as their peers, or they were finding, they're not picking up on the maths and the reading and the spelling, as Davis et al. Had said. It could be that they were incorrectly, identified as having SEN. And so these are issues that really needs to be explored. So we've had a look at the summer-born, and now I'll just move us on to, very quickly, because I know I'm running out of time, the other two aspects of additional educational needs. So we have young carers, children who are caring for people who are ill parents, so they do all the work, they do all the cleaning, all the cooking, and so on. And they end up having, it's a temporary state of affairs, because they will grow older, maybe later on other people can come and help, and so on. But again, this could constitute a barrier to them engaging well with the curriculum. Ethnic minorities, newcomers, I mentioned that earlier when I was talking about English as an additional language. But there are also, for example, people who might be familiar with the traumas that are going on in different parts of the world, Syria, etc. Recently, there was a massive bomb in Lebanon. Of course, the whole world is suffering from the effects of the coronavirus. So let's put that to one side. But there have been other upheavals in different parts of the world, which makes people migrate to places that they're not familiar with. And the children, when they get to these places, have to begin to learn the language and the culture in order to engage with the curriculum. And that puts them at a disadvantage when you compare them with the children who are from the place that they have moved to. The Nigerian policy, the Nigerian National Policy on Special Needs Education, spoke about nomadic nomadic travelers. We know, I think, the Fulani culture of cattle rearing and moving from place to place. So their children have to move from place to place, and this affects their education, of course. The traveler children, who are known, who are also nomadic, well, historically nomadic. They aren't nomadic at the moment currently, but historically nomadic. They don't rear cattle or anything, but they do move. They migrate a lot and move around Europe. Their cultural perspectives are not in line with educational attainments, and so there are some barriers there. That obviously can also change, so it's a temporary state of affairs. There are just two more. Can I have the previous? Yeah, thank you. And then children experiencing poverty and children of service personnel. So children of military personnel get to move all over the world, and because of their parental work expectations, again, it affects their education. And of course, children experiencing poverty. Okay, and so the last aspect, socioeconomic needs, again, as you can see, there are quite a few here. Young pregnant mothers, children in foster care, youth offenders, and there's quite a long list there. And basically, all these needs are the arguments that I am making about this is these needs mean that something additional has to be done within the curriculum in order to give these children a fair chance of engaging with the curriculum and learning in the same way as their peers. And I think, so if we look at the Nigerian special needs education policy, it says at-risk children and mentions one or two, but it does say etc. It says and so on. So it's open to anything that can put a child at risk. And it's great to identify the children at risk. And I think another thing will be so to look at, so what do you do about it? What are the strategies? What are the resources? And so on. So that really gives a sort of picture, I hope, for you as to what special educational needs are and what additional educational needs are. So one is temporary, the other is permanent. The only additional education need that doesn't follow the temporary nature, of course, is the gifted and talented. We want the gifted to be permanently gifted and talented. However, what is temporary there is if they're underachieving. If a gifted and talented child is underachieving because their needs are not being met, then that is a temporary state of affairs, because when the additional support is now put in, then they do much better.
So this was the first part of our Q&A session on special educational needs and additional needs. I really hope you found it really interesting and informative. If you'd like to know more about SEN and additional needs, we have another 4 sessions coming up, covering all the way from cognition and learning needs to sensory and physical needs, and how this impacts us as teachers and how it will influence school policy as well. So please join us for those sessions. If you'd like to join the live session, rather than just watching the recording on YouTube, you can become a member of Delta Hub, and I'm going to explain how to do that in a second. If you would rather just watch on our YouTube channel, that's fine. We have videos that will be uploaded every month following the training sessions, so please check out our YouTube channel regularly and look for these videos coming up. If you want to become a Delta Hub member, there's individual membership or there's school membership. To become an individual member is really quick and easy. Just go to our website. The link is in the description box below. The link is also on the screen. And check out the different types of membership. Just choose a package that works for you. And if your school would like to become a member, we also have options for your school. Check out our website. The link is in the description box below. And also keep checking our YouTube channel out. There'll be videos uploaded every month with these new sessions. Take a look and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want notifications for when these videos are coming up. So look forward to seeing you in the live training sessions. If not, don't forget to check out our YouTube channel and just keep updated for videos.